Look at who's in the
Coach,
house.
this is Austin Squires. I remember seeing the name. I saw him race, a journeyman, and he reached out. We talked a little bit, and I said, dude, you got to come on the podcast and share your experience with the Outdoor Nationals. And if you guys want to see how much this guy's done, go check out the vault, the RaceRex vault with Austin Squires. Dude's done a lot. He's made Supercross, outdoors, and he took this program that doesn't really pay, and he made a living at it for quite a while. So, Austin, how you doing, my man?
Doing good, buddy. Good to see you guys.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on board, man.
I appreciate it.
So you saw the video I did and read the article. What are your thoughts on how we fix this problem, and what is the problem exactly?
Yeah, I don't know if my knowledge is that great at this point. It's always, the subject has always been a stepping stone for me to at least be able to give my 2 cents, and try to figure out how to get where everybody wants it to go. So I'm able and willing to contribute some things. But I know based on what I saw in your video and what you spoke about, that's the big picture. And I think that's the direction, as personally, I've always had, a short side of thinking about, a situation in a smaller term. But over the years, I've been able to expand my mind to think much broader. And that's what I like about what you said yesterday was this was the whole picture of the sport and how to make it better. And for that's what I would like to be a part of or contribute to, whatever I can do. Right. So I like the direction you're going, and my brain hasn't gone as far as yours has already, but at this point I can be a contributor to what you guys are doing, because like I said earlier when we talked, I swam in these thoughts for so many years because I dedicated my life to the sport. And at the end of the day, I walked away semi-healthy, but I walked away with no money. I was out of money. So that was, and nobody made me go racing. I loved racing, but I put 100% effort into it year after year. No derailments along the way other than injuries. I always did good at keeping it professional and staying focused. And, some guys will go down some bumpy roads, but I managed to stay away from all that stuff. So yeah, my vision is very clear. And to be, I'm 48 now. So to be at this point and have a kind of better understanding of overall business, you start seeing things different. As a kid in my prime with racing, you're very focused on what you're doing, so you don't always see the big picture. And being older, that's what is pretty cool about the position that we're in now, is that you're not focused on how do I do better at the races. Now it's like, how can we make this sport better for the next generation? And that's what I want to be, because for all those kids that are wanting to do it, it's like, how do we help them continue? And it's not just about the teams, and it's never just been about the teams, because there is, a list of guys with gobs of talent that can get on those teams, but without having enough support, they can't get that far. And honestly, things changed tremendously when it went 2-stroke to 4-stroke, because the price of racing went up substantially. And I don't know if I could have done it on 4 strokes, because my budget was so shoestring. And when 4 strokes came along, once 4 strokes got, the tunability of 4 strokes, then race bikes started costing like 25 grand. With 2 strokes, it was literally go buy a bike for 5 grand, get your suspension done, put your few parts and pieces on it. If you needed motor work, okay, get it done. It cost you a few hundred. You were racing a really good bike for like 7 or 8 grand, and now it's like 3 times that. And now you've got gas that's $4 or $5. It's a different game. But still, those kids with talent exist. And if we can help those kids get where they want to be and help the teams survive, a team like JGR folding up is just insane to me, because they did everything right. They had all the tools, and because they couldn't find funding on an outside sponsor, really is sad, because it's when somebody is taking the majority of the profit, and these guys that have been in the sport for a decade are now folding up shop, and how many people are out of work because of it. That part's there is that's what leaves a bad taste in my mouth, for the teams anyway. So
the thing is, people say, oh, if you win, you make money. But what I'm trying to explain to people is you only make money from your independent sponsors. Like if I ride for Team Honda, that has nothing to do with the series. So there's no way if you buy a bike and show up at a national and you go 1-1 in the 450 class, you take home $3,000. That doesn't even cover your weekend expenses. How were you able to turn a system that paid so little? How did you make profit when you were racing?
The profit racing. So it didn't come from Supercross and it didn't come from motocross, the outdoor nationals. Honestly, you made your money as a privateer on the local level. You could go to the big show and you could have a good day at the national. I knocked out quite a few, like 15 days, and it was about $2,000, and those were my best days. Anyway, I was a 12th to 20th place guy when I was in the points. At most, it was a $2,000 day. Back then, Skoll was part of the privateer fund, right? So they did top privateer every week, and I think it was $1,500 for top privateer and $1,000 for second privateer. That was a lot of money for a privateer at that point. And it was cool that they were stepping in to help that system out. And there were a lot of guys that benefited from that. But at that level, that platform of AMA, Supercross, and Motocross, for a top 100 nationally ranked privateer that was finishing in the points 12th through 20th, he was only walking away with at most $2,000 for a race weekend. And add the expenses. Okay, your entry was whatever, your all the things that come with it, right? We won't break it down, but there's quite a few expenses in there, your travel expenses and all that. It's like, okay, you're making peanuts at that level. And so you would rely on your local money, whatever series you were riding, or if you chased money races, which I did plenty of that. Those were the big races that would keep you rolling. And that's all I was trying to do, was to keep my van going down the road, hitting the races up, because it was living the dream 100%. I was not working 9 to 5. I was traveling the country. I was meeting great people. I was working out every day. It's like, it was the dream, but I didn't think big enough to figure out how to make it more profitable. So I chased the money races, and everybody wants to be in the big show. Everybody wants to be on Supercross and at nationals and being that guy at a national. That's your dream. That's what brings you into the sport, because you see it on TV and you want to be a part of that. You want to be one of those guys. And unfortunately, one of those guys doesn't always pay a lot, So I worked in the off season. I drove limos in the off season once, like November, December, made a little bit of money that way. Or if I was hurt, I would drive limos as well. So I always tried to continue to get money to come in to support the racing, no matter what it was, just keep the money coming in. And I had plenty of support with bikes and parts and, outside sponsors, not outside sponsors, but industry sponsors, product sponsors, all that. I honestly didn't pay for anything, but it was up to me to get my van down the road and get to the races. So,
and I think we get a lot of snide comments, whether it's DMs or posts on YouTube about, hey guys, get over it. We love to race. We know there's no money in it. And that to me is where the problem resonates. Just because we love to go racing doesn't mean we should do it at a loss. There's a lot of guys racing MotoGP that are not racing at a loss. There's got a lot of guys racing Formula One that are not racing at a loss. And at the core of their being, they love to go racing. And I think that's that's the narrative that's been displayed. That's been the Coca-Cola syrup we've all been fed, is that our sport's different. Our sport is a bunch of guys that are passionate about racing, and we're willing to lose our asses to do it and put our lives on the line for entertainment while the promoters walk away and make money. And then as the media network grew, magazines, online websites, talk forums, they were able to spin the narrative that if you voice any discontent that the privateers are scraping on crumbs, then you've got some visceral attack on the promoters and you're trying to hurt the sport, when it's the exact opposite. like Austin said, he loves racing, did anything he could to keep that van rolling down the road. And yet the promoters have a tremendous amount of cash flow coming in. And Chris, I want to take your comment and just add one little nuance to it. We're not asking to change the sport. What we're asking is, let's change the model to grow the sport. Austin said it earlier. He's had a very successful career because he was able to minimize his downtime. I think that comment is extremely significant. As you know, Chris, having my own amateur development program, what do I try to build? Durable athletes that are able to go the distance, a sustainable program that builds a career of longevity. Now, I don't just say that as kind of a mantra. I try to live by it. We've had an amateur development program for 14 years. I try to put my money where my mouth is. But when people say, hey, look, we just race because we love it, we're passionate, and we're supposed to be okay with that, that's where I think we have hit a huge, huge hurdle. Because if you start to come up with any kind of models that changes the existing, then somehow you want to redistribute the wealth. That's the furthest thing from Chris and I. Austin, I don't know how you stand economically, but Chris and I are extremely conservative. We're not into redistribution of wealth. What we're into is, how do we build a sport that grows organically? Austin, I wanted to pick your brain on something. When you said that you're, essentially getting by racing locally, what was one of the biggest races that you did locally, dollar amount wise? And there's a reason why I'm asking. It's not a loaded question, I promise.
One of the bigger races. So there are always some annual races throughout the year, if we're counting contingency, that was my drive, right? So I made a switch to Kawasaki in 2004. I went and bought a 03 KX 250, and actually my dealer in Texas, which was Plano Kawasaki, paid for it for me, and then he let me pay him $500 a month until it was paid for. But I took that bike racing because Cowie had produced their contingency program for 2004. And it was substantial. And at that point, I'm 30 plus, so I can ride both pro classes and plus 25, plus 30. So when the contingency races existed, I would go regionally, whether it was Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma had races, Missouri. I would just bounce around, and there would be good weekends. I would come out to California in Winter Series to do GFIs and stuff. And when I could bang out all 4 classes with Cowie contingency plus track money, you could make like 2,500. But my 2 biggest hits came from Supercross, right? They were definitely my biggest money makers. But the local money, the expense was a lot less, getting there. So that was obviously a key thing, especially if you can sleep in your bed at night and drive to the races that morning. A good race weekend, $1,500 was a great race weekend. My program was very minimalistic as far as expenses, and that was profitability to me. So it was, like I said, the Texas Pro Challenge was always a big go-to. It's an end of the year race, which had good money, and you hit some of those races and get a decent finish. 2,000 to 3,000 was a really good weekend. So those were my high points, I guess you could say, for money,
And that was still in 2004, roughly 4 or 5.
All. I first went to Texas in '97. I did the Pro Challenge at the end of that year, and I think I was 5th or 6th on the 250, and I think I got 3rd on the 125, and it ended up being a good chunk of change, probably the most I'd ever made at that point. But yeah, so those races stay on your list. It's like which ones to hit. There was a Loretta Lynn's a fair race in Missouri every year. So you go from Loretta's to Missouri to Millville National. If you could bang out all 3, you could make like $5,000 in 3 weeks of racing, but you were literally on the road for 3 weeks to do all that stuff. So living out of the box van, sleeping in the box van every night and all that. But that was always a profitable little journey as well. Some of those little fair races, I don't know how heavy they exist anymore, but back then they were pretty common. And it was a nice little outlet for privateers to make good money.
And Chris, that's exactly my point. we have a guy top 20 nationally as a pro saying that he can make as much money or more at a fair race than he can at the Premier Series, of which represents our sport.
Could you imagine Tom Brady saying, yeah, I'm going to play on Sunday, but I got to go Thursday to this arena football game to make money so I can play on Sunday?
That's what I'm hoping our listeners understand. We are not on a witch hunt. You have somebody that was a top 20 national, filling up stadiums, pulling people to the sidelines of an outdoor national track to watch him haul the mail around the track. And he's saying that he could make more money on pickup races than the Premier show.
Well, and think about this. And that fair promoter probably at least broke even, maybe profited a little bit of money. If he can pay that much.
Do you think there's a promoter out there that would run a race at a loss?
No,
you can't stay in business.
That's okay. No, that is actually, Davey has found these people who will run it at a loss because they love this and they want to have a national so bad. It does exist, but no, for the most part, promoters make money.
But take that out of the equation. If there isn't the strong arm for an area, a regional, or a national, or a GNCC, there's the big four. Those are the anchors for MX Sports, right? If I have a venue, I can leverage an area, a regional, a GNCC, or a pro national. I don't know how many total tracks there are in the country. Maybe one of our listeners that is a statistician could figure it out. Take those four corners of the sport, of which is owned and manipulated by MX Sports. If you take that out, how many race venues? Because by the way, go look at the contract. It states in the contract that if Chris Cooksey is awarded a national at his venue, he cannot have any competing races for those next 12 months. That's considered a pro level national. So what did you just do for the remaining 51 weeks out of the year? You just throttled the track that you can bring. So there's no competition in that model. Because if you, Chris Cooksey, agree to put on my national, I throttle you for 51 weeks that you can put nothing that competes against my national caliber series, of which Mr. Austin shows up and is making less money at the premier, historical, prestigious outdoor national, of which he makes more money at a fair race on a Thursday, that he can get enough money to go try and demonstrate his capabilities at the premier level. Do you see how upside down and backwards this model is? And there's not a businessman that's listening to this show that would run, unless you work for the government, you can't run a business at a loss. So when you tell me there's no money to distribute, and Austin, I don't want to put words in your mouth, when you were competing for a pro purse, would that pro purse be $5,000, $10,000? Let's take one of the fair races that you were talking about. What would the total purse be for that week, that night?
They varied. And yeah, you would pick and choose based on what the overall payout would be.
What's the biggest one you saw?
Pro Challenge was pretty big. That was 25 grand, but it's split between two classes, you know?
All right. So $25,000. Okay. And the promoter could put that up, and I'm just going to use it generically. Austin, correct me if I'm wrong. Let's just say that was a fair race, or even if it was an outdoor, it wasn't maybe a fair venue, but $25,000 purse was offered by, and I'm not saying this derogatorily, by a small promoter. Wow. And yet he could still run it profitably. Or to your point, Chris, maybe that race he ran at a loss, but his other four races in a series, he could recoup it and still be profitable at the end of the year. Because I don't know about Austin, but I don't go to work for free. And I certainly don't go and run a business at a loss.
What you said right there about recouping it with the other races, that is one of the things that MX Sports sells on these guys. You're officially a national track. And they're like, that has value, that has meaning. And it does.
Prestige. Don't forget the word.
Yeah, prestige. Sorry, yeah, you're right. Prestige is the one they always use. But there is something to that, but it's looking at that contract, I still wouldn't sign. I don't care how much prestige